America's elites are more pro-Trump than ever before, but they could also be his undoing. Let's rewind for a second. There was a funny moment at the 2016 White House Correspondents Association dinner. The president historically gives a speech at these dinners that's part tribute to press freedom and part amateur comedy set. Occasionally, the jokes kind of reveal something true.
Even my aides can't explain the rising poll numbers. What has changed? Nobody can figure it out.
At the time, that was just kind of a funny dig at Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. But it also spoke to a truth. Obama was in the middle of something kind of unusual for a president these days, getting more popular. After bottoming out around 40%, his approval rating then started to slowly climb. And later, he left office at almost 60%. That's pretty unique in recent history. In the 21st century, every other president has left office deeply unpopular. Now, this might seem like a weird thing to even talk about, because it's kind of built into our expectations nowadays that presidents just cannot be overwhelmingly popular. Even Obama's 60% at the end left 4 in 10 Americans disliking him. But that did not used to be the case. For decades after public polling really began in the 50s, presidents would start with enormous support from the public, and often keep it throughout their presidencies. Until the 1970s, every new president had about a 70% approval rating for their first 100 days in office. Since the 1980s, no president has had that. And the only one of the past 4 to not leave office deeply unpopular is Obama. And as he alluded to in that clip, there's reason to believe that that was at least partly because of unique circumstances. 2015 and 2016 saw both parties running the most unpopular candidates in recorded history. So it makes sense that Obama would start to look better by comparison. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for this shift. One pretty compelling one is that Americans now consider whether or not they approve of a president to be a direct marker of their own partisan identity. Whereas a Democrat in 1958 might have been able to say they liked Dwight Eisenhower and still retain their identity as a staunch Democrat, or a Republican could approve of Bill Clinton in 1997 and still think of themselves as a good Republican, the rise of tribalism and 24-hour news and curated social media feeds makes that much more difficult now. But a broader look at Americans' views on national politics and institutions shows that this is not an isolated trend. Congress's approval rating in the fucking basement. Views on the direction of the country consistently negative. The Supreme Court, the most unpopular it's ever been. The media, the most distrusted it's ever been. One-term presidents, as many in the past 8 years as in the previous 80 years. Huge political upheaval. DC went from a Republican trifecta in 2017 to a Democratic trifecta in 2021, and back to a Republican trifecta in 2025. And this is not limited to the US. Across the world, countries big and small are in a period of huge turmoil. Deeply unpopular presidents and prime ministers getting tossed out for new leaders, who are barely able to settle in before becoming deeply unpopular themselves. This dynamic is something new. And now, Donald Trump, the ultimate sign of dissatisfaction and anti-elite rebellion, is beginning his second presidency. And he's being welcomed into elite circles more than ever before. So this tension is really important and really key to the direction of his second term. And it's worth asking the question, where is it coming from? In 2014, former CIA analyst Martin Gurri laid out a theory in his book Revolt of the Public. Over the past few decades, the political and media establishment has, quote, lost their monopoly over political reality, leading to what he calls a crisis of authority. Essentially, as the old barriers to information have broken down, people have grown less confident in the elites to whom they used to defer. The book turned out to be pretty predictive. After it was published, we saw the rise of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, Britain's vote to leave the EU, left-wing populists like Mexico's AMLO, and right-wing populists like Italy's Giorgia Meloni and Argentina's Javier Milei. So even though it doesn't have all the answers, it was onto something. The first big piece of this theory is social media and the internet. For those of us who have never known anything else, this really does take some time to wrap your head around, so it does need to be emphasized. Before the internet, before non-traditional news sources, how information flowed, who got to tell stories, what stories were deemed acceptable or not acceptable to report on or even acknowledge, that was all concentrated in the hands of a few people. If you couldn't get papers to write about something or networks to talk about something, you could either stand on a street corner and yell, buy a billboard, or give up. Those were really your only options. There's an old story that baseball legend Babe Ruth once ran through a train car full of journalists chased by a naked woman with a knife, and the journalists following the team remarked that they would only write about it if she stabbed him. It's a funny story, but it gets to a truth about journalism and information pre-internet. There was a lot of gatekeeping of the kind of stuff that nowadays would be either huge stories or just kind of common knowledge. And that's complicated. There were real upsides to that era. For one, we all had a lot more privacy, including public figures. Not every little embarrassing detail or event had to be publicly known or litigated. The information that hit the public often had to go through rigorous journalistic standards. The downside is that it was used to suppress and cover up a lot of stuff. A way smaller group of people decided what information was worth telling and how. And that often was heavily biased and lacking. Stuff like the sexual abuse of public figures were often open secrets among elites, but didn't make it into the public domain because there was no way to circumvent mainstream media institutions. Whatever you think about the pros and cons, the internet fundamentally changed that. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement. However you feel about it, it is not a coincidence that that movement exploded when phones and the internet gave people the tools to record and tell their own personal experiences themselves. Or look at Me Too. Rich, powerful men who succeeded in silencing their victims for decades were able to be taken down after social media meant that allegations couldn't be ignored. The point here is not to get into the thorny question of whether information flow is better or worse now. It's just to emphasize how much the rules have changed. And that's one of the core theses of Gurri's book. In the modern era, this fundamental rules change has created a situation where the public is in permanent opposition to the elites. Now, to be fair, a lot of people here might be saying, well, the world kind of sucks right now. Inflation, inequality, wars, climate change, whatever. Of course it makes sense to be dissatisfied with the status quo. And sure, it's fair to feel that way on one level. I'm not here to tell you to be happy with anyone. But there are a couple really important facts. First, it is objectively healthier, easier, and more comfortable to be a person today than at any point in human history. You can have any number of fair dissatisfactions, but that is just a fact. And more importantly, this dissatisfaction does not seem to correlate to economic or social well-being indicators. Take the question of whether the US is on the right track or the wrong track, which pollsters have been asking for decades. Americans have consistently said the country is on the wrong track in times of high inflation and low, war and peace, high unemployment and low unemployment, sickness and health, Republican and Democratic power. In summer 2024, when there was a lot of discussion about Joe Biden's unpopularity, this image went viral, showing the deep unpopularity of every G7 leader. These countries have vastly different economies, different demographics, different education, healthcare, and tax systems. They had different reactions to COVID and way different economic recoveries. The leaders represented different parties and ideologies, and yet they were universally unpopular. Most way more than Biden. Yes, inflation and the hangover of COVID is a factor, and probably will be for a long time. But when the dynamic is this pervasive, when it has this little correlation to individual countries' situations, when unpopular leaders' replacements almost immediately become unpopular themselves, it's hard not to conclude that Gurri was onto something. Look at the UK, for example, where the Labour Party just won its biggest victory in decades, only to watch public support collapse almost immediately. Across the world right now, there seems to be a deep skepticism and cynicism about those in power that cannot be easily shaken. And that goes a long way towards explaining Trump's victory in November. It's not just that he was technically out of power and Democrats were in, it's also that he showed a unique ability to capture the country's desire for revolt. And arguably nothing is a better example of that than picking Robert Kennedy Jr. to be Health and Human Services Secretary. Last spring, we published a video about Kennedy that touched on his appeal to anti-establishment voters. A reason Kennedy became a real force in the 2024 election, even after he dropped out, and a reason his Make America Healthy Again mantra has struck such a nerve, is because of a dynamic that Gurri writes about. He says, quote, "The immediate target of a revolt is an elite class that has failed persistently, on its own terms." And it's hard to argue with the fact that we've failed on public health. Right now, the US has worse health outcomes than just about every other developed nation. Look at child mortality, maternal mortality, obesity, heart disease, life expectancy. Now, there is some important nuance here, including the fact that some of those statistics have actually improved notably. But still, with that as the backdrop, it's not hard to see why a lot of people, not just vaccine skeptics or raw beef eaters or whatever, don't see Kennedy as an immediately weird or wild pick relative to the establishment. If the experts, the people who have been in charge of the institutions that supposedly need to be protected, have presided over the current state of public health, can you really blame people for not buying the argument? Politically, the verdict is now in. People know more about elites than ever before, they have more access to information on elites' failures than ever before, and they hate what they see. And that becomes really important given one crucial new fact. Elites are now hugging Donald Trump like never before. Whether you think it was good or bad, it's a fact that elite institutions never treated Trump the first time like a normal president. Every living former president and first lady opposed him in 2016 and 2024. Companies boycotted or left his commissions. He wasn't invited to state funerals. Hollywood was universally against him. There were no Vogue covers for Melania like Michelle Obama or Jill Biden. And while this whole thing is really complex, it's pretty clear now that that did actually end up helping him in 2024. At a time when people hated the establishment, all that hate from the establishment helped him break through as an anti-elite elite. But the second time around, the dynamic is way different. Fashion designers are dressing Melania and bragging about it. Social media CEOs are buddying up with him.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point.
Celebrities are open about supporting him. Corporations are abandoning diversity initiatives and advertising seed oil-free menus. 4 out of 5 of the richest people in the world were right behind him at his inauguration. And these elites don't care about Trump's agenda of disruption. They're motivated by self-preservation. And that means we could soon see a conflict between the RFK Jr.'s and the Zuckerbergs of the world. Those who want to disrupt and those who want to preserve. So far, a lot of the reaction to this stuff has been conservatives celebrating that they finally broke through the elite barrier, and liberals' newfound indignation at what they call
an oligarchy.
But wherever you fall, this is a big break from the last 10 or 15 years, when Democrats had an increasing monopoly on these establishment forces. And that is the ultimate test of this new era. So much of Republicans' success in 2024 was about being the party of the public's revolt. Now, for the first time in literally decades, conservatives have control of government and are gaining ground in pop culture, Hollywood, and business. So what happens when they become the establishment? It's a new year, it's a new president, it's a new era in politics. And whether you're thrilled or worried, there's a lot to learn and a lot to know about. So hit that subscribe button and that bell so you know every time we post a video.